Starting with one of the most important techniques in architectural drawing is using a variation of line weight. Working up a skill where you can manipulate these different line weights can explain your design in a clear and precise manner to whoever you're trying to present to. I didn't pick up the importance of using line weights until later on in my career, when I had to start explaining to different types of people, not just clients, but consultants, my colleagues, other design teams and council. Using a variation of different line weights really helped get my ideas and the different parameters that were driving my design clearly across the table. So what are line weights? Line weights are simply how thick or thin the lines are on the page. When I first started drawing, I would just use pencils, and the different grades would really give me a lot of control over my sketches. But time went on and I started to get a bit more confident. I like to use some more textures and pens as well. You can layer it up with double strokes or for thicker lines, or adjusting pressure, particularly with pencils. Additionally to using different line weights, dashed or dotted lines are utilised to represent hidden objects or convey special considerations in a drawing, like centre points. When I sketch, I rely on a minimum of 3 line weights, using a lead pencil, an ultrafine Sharpie point, and a fine 1mm marker. These weights consist of a fine light grey, a medium black, and a thick heavy black, and sometimes use colour with highlighters and textures. Before I start getting into the sketching, I want to explain why strategically manipulating these line weights in a drawing help humans and their brains figure out and organize all the information on the page. You tap into this natural occurrence known as atmospheric perspective, where when objects closer to us are noticeably higher in contrast and appear more darker and saturated. And the further something is away from you, like you have more atmosphere between you and that object. So it reduces contrast, details and colour saturation, which we all perceive in the same way of having things in the background more lighter. Architectural drawings are mainly two-dimensional, but they look more natural when we exploit this effect of atmospheric perspective and use a variety of line weights to achieve the depth in our drawings. This in return helps communicate our designs more easily. So using this perspective method, you could set your background lines, your middle ground lines and your foreground lines into a strategic manner with your line weights. So foreground lines would be set in the back, being the lightest, and the foreground lines being the more boldest that you want to display and draw attention to, and the middle ground would be your pen. This would make up most of the drawing and are closer to you than the background information. Also, when you're using textures, make sure to have paper underneath the tracing paper to avoid drawing on desks. See how the line weight helps organize the information, and this also applies to technical drawings alike. So how can you use them to help with the design process? When you're sketching, pay attention to the hand position and lock your hand in place with your arm, pulling the pen or the pencil along the paper, not pushing it. Also pay attention to the corners. Corner lines are essential when you overlap them just slightly to get that architectural sketch look. But be careful not to cut your corners too short, as this can have a messy result. A subtle overlap adds a crisp and intentional feel to the sketch that enhances the overall quality. When you're working with concept sketches, you're iterative. This design process is all about testing and speculating ideas. When you're drawing straight lines, they can be a little bit wavery and showing that you have this kind of sketching concept at early stages. It's preliminary. And tracing paper allows us to be able to explore over and over so many different ideas that we have and help guide us in the right direction with our design. Unless you're on the road or you don't have a desk close by, then a sketchbook is always really handy. But most architects use tracing paper because design is naturally an iterative process. If you make a mistake on the base layer, simply roll out another sheet and sketch over it. Building upon layers and layers will help you refine your ideas and your sketching style, and it should remind you that sketches don't have to be perfect. You want to focus on exploring and finding results rather than finding perfection. I'll admit that I used to skip a lot of these iterative steps when it came to design. I would go straight to the ArchiCAD and would build up a model that was more form-based, and kind of cut myself short in this design process of exploring function. You tend to get stuck in these kind of linear grids when you're working in floor plan, and when you're in section you start to set yourself parameters. But when you've got this loose flow with your hand and you're sketching, anything can come to the page. And over time, as you start to really develop those skills, you'll be able to really get those visions that you have in your head and figure out different techniques and applying this narrative to your design. So see how it's lacking depth when it's just two-dimensional? But as soon as you go in with a thicker line weight, it starts to tell a story. It starts to layer up the kind of things that you're trying to inform in the drawing. Starting in pencil is a lot more forgiving, and you can try and get the forms and shapes of the building correctly and get the proportions correct, so it will steer your drawing in the right direction. Also do my people in pencil, try and make sure I get them at the right scale, and then you can go in with the thicker lines and help refine any mistakes that you may have done with the pencil. The middle ground lines make up most of the drawing and are closer to you than the background information, showing the cuts through doors or windows, maybe floor planes and stairs, railings in the distance, figures in section, sight lines, trees outside, vegetation. And when you've completed the middle ground, you'll move on to the foreground, which is where the thickest line is. Thick lines, weights, outline the perimeter of whatever the drawing is cutting through. I also use them for building outlines or anything I want to emphasize in the drawing. In a plan sketch, this would be the outer perimeter of the walls being cut through. In a section, the cut line of the walls, floors, ceiling and roof planes. And in a site plan, the overall building outline or a silhouette in perspective. So you kind of step back for a minute as well, and you pretend you're looking at it for the first time. Are they telling you the right things, or do you need to add a thicker texture? So in this case, I felt like it did need more of an outline to distinguish exactly the form of the building, and I think that really helped get the architectural sketch that I was looking for. Once it's looking like an architectural drawing, you can come back and add the textures, and I'll use this using a lead pencil for finer details, or light accents indicating fixtures, vegetation and furniture too, also people, and the ultra-fine point Sharpie I'll use for concrete and heavier materials or hatching. I wanted to use some colours, so I've grabbed some highlighters in a pastel range. I feel like they're a lot softer and more easier on the eye. And these are Copic markers that I've bought. They're quite expensive. The highlighters seem to do the job for me, and they are a lot more cheaper than the markers. Although I do use the grey Copic marker quite a bit. I think that's really helpful for glazing or shadow lines, shading interior spaces. Another advantage to using tracing paper is you can turn it around and do your shading and colours on the back of it. It shows up on the drawing a lot softer, and you can control it a lot more. I think having this skill of using different line weights and being able to be more explorative and loose in the initial steps of design, it really sets you above the rest, because it's becoming a really rare skill to have in practice, and it's really helped me be able to work at this kind of space where you go into this zone, and you start to think about all these little details in a building that you wouldn't necessarily pick up in ArchiCAD or any kind of software on the computer. Time slows down for you, and you start to really feel yourself in these spaces. Whereas when you're in a computer, I feel like the whole day can just get away from you, and you haven't been able to, just like test out all these different ideas. You've spent a few hours setting up one floor plan, and it really slows that whole design process down. You're definitely being a lot more valuable if you can have the courage to just start sketching while you're at uni, and using the time to like refine your unique style. So I'm going to draw one more drawing with a house that's in section, and I start off in lead pencil, just getting my proportions right. Always try to put a human in there first to get the scale and the height of the ceiling, the angle of the roof, the spaces that I want to try and portray. Start to do a little bit of interior design to show what rooms are what and how these spaces would feel internally, and also try to have a little bit of an idea of the structure and where beams and columns would need to go, materiality of what this building would be. So detailing this one quite a bit more, but just wanted to show you how the depth of a drawing can really get, and how flat it can look when it is just two dimension. But then also when you start to layer it up in pen, it will give you the sketch that you're looking for, hopefully. So I'll go in with my 0.4 Artline pen and start to really refine some of these details that I've sketched up in pencil. And you don't want to rush the process. I'm worried that a lot of this fast track video recording might give you the wrong impression, but this is the pace that I'll tend to draw, and doing the long strides with my hand locked in place with my arm, not at my wrist, to give me more controlled lines. But also being a lot more looser with how I'm drawing, letting the lines not be perfect. Now I'm drawing the cut lines through the door and the floor